and the Masters of the Universe. I am Adam, Prince of Eternia and defender of the secrets of Castle Grayskull. This is Cringer, my fearless friend. Fabulous secret powers were revealed to me the day I held aloft my magic sword and said, "By the power of Grayskull, Cringer became the mighty Battle Cat, and I became He-Man, the most powerful man in the universe."
You know, I always got confused why He-Man would punch his audience right in his own intro. He always struck me as such a good guy, and then out of nowhere, he just takes the opportunity to whack all of the children right in the face. But yes, welcome everybody to this video, which will be a top 20 list of my favorite episodes of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, a childhood favorite of mine. Probably the very first animated series that I ever became a fan of, and a property that I remain a fan of to this very day for God knows what reason. Who would have thought that this cheesy little cartoon from the 80s would spawn 130 episodes, bolster a successful toy line. The toy line came out first, but the show certainly helped add to its fame. Got an infamous live-action movie starring a wonderful performance from Frank Langella. And if you've never seen the Masters of the Universe movie, I highly recommend checking it out, if for nothing else but for Frank Langella's performance. I myself, you know, we're around Christmas time, and I know some people don't think of Christmas when they think of Masters of the Universe unless they're one of the fans that watch the He-Man and She-Ra Christmas special every year. I am not one of those, because I actually hate the Christmas special, and I refuse to accept it as canon, because Skeletor finds the spirit of Christmas, and I'm like, no, I want Skeletor to be evil. That's BS. That's lame. Lame. I don't like that. I prefer my Skeletor to be evil. That's my Skeletor impression. I won't do it again, I promise. But yeah, I mean, when I think of Christmas, I really do think of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, because I have so many fond memories as a kid of getting the toys, specifically the action figures, as presents. Now, I was born in 1985, and the toy line started in 1982, so actually He-Man's a little bit like a hair before my time, but I did have an older brother, and he passed it down to me. So most of the He-Man toys I played with were hand-me-downs from him, but I loved them all the same. And when I think back of the action figures I played with in my youth, you know, Star Wars Kennerline, you know, G.I. Joe, Transformers, Thundercats, so many. Really, the best ones to me, or the ones I had the most fun with, were the Ninja Turtles line from Playmates, and also He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. I think they were the best lines. I think they were the right size. I think they were the most durable. That was one of my criticisms of the G1 Transformers. I mean, they look great, but I feel like if I blowed on them or sneezed on them, they would break or snap in half or something. But Masters of the Universe had one of the best toy lines, and is actually the brand that gave me my all-time favorite childhood toy, which is Modulok. This neat little gimmicky toy that could be taken apart and reassembled in any way I could imagine. A thing that gave me endless hours of enjoyment, something that, God, there's so many pieces of the thing. Right now I have it assembled as two separate monsters, but, you know, it really was something that I could honestly, you know, before I discovered what Game Boy was, you could just hand me Modulok and I would just mess with this thing for hours. It was just so fascinating to me. Even today, I find it makes a great office toy, you know, a great stress reliever when I'm doing work at home, or stressed out filling out paperwork or doing my taxes or something.
5 hours later.
And there he is, a very basic configuration of Modulok. Got the two heads, all the arms, all the legs. All that, but that's also the 10th configuration I did while filming. I will cut out all the rest, I promise. But yeah, I mean, to this day, I still get like a lot of Masters of the Universe gear. Like there's the recent, fairly recent comic book series from DC. A series that I quite enjoyed. It started off a little clunky, but once it got going, especially with the introduction of the Horde, I thought it was really good stuff. And then we also get the this is the one where they cross over into the DC universe, and we get to see He-Man fight Superman, and Batman interact with friggin' Skeletor, and the Justice League Dark get involved, and interesting twist with who the villain is. But the adventures would eventually spill back into Eternia with all these wonderful issues, and end with the Eternity War, which was the huge climactic battle for Eternia, and was well done in the comics. I actually quite enjoyed what DC brought. They've actually introduced He-Man into the recent Injustice storyline. I haven't read any of that yet, but I'll be sure to check it out, because, you know, He-Man interacting with Superman and Batman and all that stuff, that's just, I mean, that's crack to me. And I've shown this off before, but this is the recent He-Man and Thundercats crossover. If you're a fan of 80s cartoons, this thing is a must-read, I think. It's total, like, nostalgia porn or nerd porn or whatever you want to call it, but it was very entertaining. And actually, recent birthday, I got this gem from my sister. This is the Classics line, featuring Skeletor and Molar, the Eternian dentist. For those of you who watch Robot Chicken, this is a depiction of this sketch. And I have not taken them out of the box because I don't want to. Yeah, I have the entire animated series on DVD, which helped out a lot in my research for the top 20 episodes. I like this little mural that it makes. You can't really see it here. Let me see if I can hold it somewhat straight. There you go. It's a mural of Castle Grayskull and Snake Mountain there. It looks very nice. You got the reverse. You get nice little shots of the characters. Also great. Great stuff. I also have the movie on DVD. I'm thinking about getting the Blu-ray because of all the extra features that go along with it. But again, check that movie out for Frank Langella's performance. And Dark Horse Comics has released some great, like, He-Man companion books. This contains all the mini comics that came with the original action figures. One of the greatest attributes of the action figure toy line was that the toys would come with mini comics to go along with the toy. What toy line does that now? And now I have all the mini comics, which to me is almost cooler than having the toys, because these things are just so fascinating. Some of them are just blatant adverts for the toy they came with, or, you know, which begs the question, why are you advertising a toy I already have? Other ones are like very interesting tales, and some of them are just downright silly and just a lot of fun to read. I think my favorite one was, purely for silliness, I think my favorite moment was when Skeletor unleashed his time demons on the good guys, and his time demons are just giant clock robots, which is just, that is just so Skeletor. It's just so Skeletor to do something like that. Dark Horse also released this fantastic art book. This is the episode guide for both the original He-Man series and the original She-Ra series. And there's this sucker, which I'm actually in the process of reading, the character guide and world compendium. So this thing is massive and very expansive. I'm about 3/4 of the way through it. It's taken me much longer to read that thing than all the other books, because it's just it is just so massive. And on Netflix, there's a couple documentaries that I have certainly watched. The Toys That Made Us, I highly recommend checking that out. If you're a fan of those old 80s toy lines, they have an episode on Transformers, they have one on G.I. Joe, they have one on Lego, which was fascinating. They have one on Star Wars, they have one on Star Trek, which that one was interesting because I didn't know that Star Trek had like a massive toy presence. It turns out a lot of what the episode was about was that they really didn't have the greatest toy presence. It was like this, it was like very much like the show. It was the search for something new where no man has gone before, and just trying to get Star Trek a goddamn solid toy license. But yeah, those episodes are great. I think the He-Man one is the best one, though. Just for, it really highlights what is so great about that franchise and why it continues to have any kind of a fan presence to this day. Because it is just so uniquely strange unto itself. But yeah, again, around Christmas time, it's almost a guarantee that I'm going to get like some kind of He-Man related gift. I actually have a Skeletor ornament, a tree ornament, that I gave to my parents, and it goes on the tree because it's like, you know, we meet up for we meet up every Christmas, and it's kind of like all of us put ourselves into the tree. And there's nothing more Patrick than a Skeletor ornament. I also have a piece of He-Man artwork on my wall. I don't know if you can see it. It's Heman and Skeletor right above my TV. And the shirt I'm wearing, which combines hard rock music and my love of this series. I love this image. Those of you who follow me on Twitter, I actually use this as my avatar on Twitter as well. It's just a great image. One of my favorite albums combined with one of my favorite animated shows from my childhood, so it's just perfect. I actually got a big compliment on this from Jess Harnell, the voice of Wacko from Animaniacs. When I got up to go meet him and get his autograph, he was like, "Oh my God, that's awesome. It's music and cartoons all together." I'm like, "Yep, that's why I loved it. That's why I wanted it." But so I guess that begs the question, like, I am, even to this day, in my 30s, I'm still a devoted fan to Masters of the Universe and everything that it entails. Why? Why is it that this cartoon, specifically it was the cartoon that got me into it, but why this property, why this cartoon, why these characters? And I think a lot of it is, in my youth, I always admired things that really almost had no grounds in reality. Like, one of the things I loved about Star Wars was that it was both fantasy and science fiction, and you could do almost anything you wanted with it. It had rules. Star Wars had rules, but you could do almost anything you wanted with it because it had mysticism and magic with the Force and the Jedi and all of that stuff, and it also had hard science fiction with spaceships. But it was very like, I say hard sci-fi, it really wasn't. When I think of hard sci-fi, I think of things like Star Trek and Blade Runner. This was more like action-adventure, Flash Gordon type of science fiction. And He-Man had that same quality, but turned up to about 1,000, where it was pure sword and sorcery, but mixed in with wacky over-the-top science fiction. And it was the best way I can describe it is that it was like Flash Gordon meets Conan the Barbarian. It was two things that absolutely should not go together. And even if you read the early mini comics, it really felt like they wanted to go more in a Conan direction with it, but then along the lines, like, the Flash Gordon influence almost took over, and then you get like characters like Trapjaw, who's like a pirate-looking cyborg guy. One of the coolest toys in the line. One of my personal favorites. I wish I still had him because he would make a great display piece. But I'm sure I could probably get one on eBay. All right, mental note, hit up eBay right after you film this video. But anyway, I think it was the wonderful imagination of the property itself. And again, go back and watch those documentaries on Netflix. There's The Toys That Made Us. There's that massive documentary that came out a couple months ago that talks about the show, the toy line, the fandom, and everything else. And it really is just this really creative, one-of-a-kind world. There's nothing else quite like it, with the wacky characters, with the wacky names. One of the jokes about He-Man and the Masters of the Universe was that if you wanted to name a character, all you had to do was take a noun and add either man or to it. That's how you get Skeletor and He-Man, or what were some other ones? Man at Arms, or Man-E Faces, one of my favorite stupid names. Ratlore, he's a rattlesnake, so we'll call him Ratlore. And, there's this one guy that's, got a wheel on his stomach, so we'll call him Dragstore, because he rolls on the ground. He's kind of like a human bullet, but he's like a human dragster as well, so we'll call him Dragstore. And a bunch of things like that. Bad puns, craziness, and just unabashedly ridiculous. And I kind of admired that. I kind of just admired there was no other property, even back in the 80s, as wacky as everything was back then, that quite touched the level of insanity of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. So whether it be the comics, the TV show, the toy line, there was just no end to just the wacky characters that could be created, and the different types of creative stories that could be told. And I think that's why it got so big. It was that there was literally nothing they couldn't do, and it expanded. They got a movie, and they got a sister show, literally a sister show with She-Ra. They got a spin-off show in the early 90s, which actually, I know a lot of fans don't like the New Adventures of He-Man and consider it kind of the black sheep of the He-Man mythos. To some extent, I can see why, but I have a fondness for that, if only because the first He-Man action figure I ever got that was mine, it wasn't a hand-me-down from my brother, was the Skeletor figure from that toy line. And that was a great looking figure too. Like, I always liked the way Skeletor looked in that line. Not on the show, they didn't get the look quite right on the show, but in the toy line he looked great. And I think that's another thing I should really elaborate on. I talk about the characters and everything, but really, and I really go back to the Filmation show because that was really where it all started. That was my first exposure to He-Man. And it was really those old VHS tapes that my brother and I used to watch that really got me into it. And I joke about it all the time, but He-Man and She-Ra, the movie, Secret of the Sword, that was like my favorite movie when I was 4 years old. And my brother and I watched it so many times, we broke the tape. And then I went back and revisited the movie when I was in high school. I was like, wow, this didn't really hold up. But really, it was that classic Filmation cartoon that made me fall in love with the property, fall in love with these characters, fall in love with things like the theme music. I mean, the He-Man theme music, which you heard in the intro of this video, was insanely good. And yes, it's on my workout playlist. And yes, whenever I feel like I'm getting tired, I play that theme song and I feel like I could do 1,000 more reps. It gets me that pumped up. It's almost as effective as the Rocky music. It's just that good. And but really, when I think back on the Filmation show, the things that stand out to me, the characters. I really, as a kid, I really did like these characters, specifically the good guys, the family, the royal family. You had the king and the queen. You had Prince Adam, who was secretly He-Man, and having to keep that secret caused a lot of problems with his parents and, his relationship with Teela, who's the captain of the royal guard and like a sister to him. Also a great character. I think... most people don't like comedy characters, but as a kid, I liked Orko as a kid. Watching the show as an adult, I just kind of go sometimes, God damn it, Orko, stop screwing up. Cringer, the cowardly talking tiger that would turn into Battle Cat. So I was like, that was always a fun transformation to me because I think a lot of kids wish they could kind of like brush their fears off and become this mighty, invincible force. Like more so than Prince Adam and He-Man. Like the transformation of Cringer to Battle Cat was even more striking. And at times, like with the lessons that they would try to put into these shows, and even like the morals that would be literally tacked on at the end of each episode, which I wasn't always a fan of because even as a kid, I always felt like it's like, I could kind of get the lesson of the show from watching it myself. I don't need to have it spelled out to me, but I think that points to the type of people that worked at Filmation, and specifically Lou Scheimer, the head of the company, and what he wanted to do. And he wanted to make sure that the kids learned something from these shows. And whether it was, too on the nose or what, I respect the thought behind doing such a thing. And but it really was these characters then having to learn all these lessons that really made it feel like a family. And you have all these interactions in these exciting action adventure stories that capture the imaginations of children that with this great music and these great settings too. That's the other thing. This show had boasted to this day, while the animation on the Filmation show was very limited because they were famed for using a lot of stock animations and recycled animations, and they had a very unique style with their animation, let's put it that way, and it was very very cost effective, let's also say that. The backgrounds were gorgeous, and I put the backgrounds of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe up against any animated show out there, even today. The way Castle Grayskull looked, the way Snake Mountain looked, the way every location looked. The locations were just beautiful, and it made Eternia just come to life as this wonderful world. But to expand on the characters, I would be doing a disservice if I didn't mention one of my favorite characters in the history of fiction, one who I provided you an impression of earlier in this video. The Lord of Destruction, the Master of Evil, Skeletor, voiced by Alan Oppenheimer, who is just such a wonderful character. I love Skeletor to death. And I think he was the character that made me appreciate villains that just enjoy being evil. Like every episode, he just looks like he's having a delight, just being as evil as possible. And it's like he was born to do this. Why is he evil? Because I can be, and because I want to be. And it's like, you look at him and characters like the Emperor from Star Wars, and like Maleficent, and like Hans Gruber from Die Hard, or Zod from Superman 2. There's just something appealing about a character that just enjoys being evil. Vincent Price as Ratigan from The Great Mouse Detective is another great example of that. You know, you can have a great three-dimensional villain where you understand his motivations and everything like that, but sometimes it's just fun to have a character that just does it for the sake of doing it, and does it because fuck it, I chose it. And Skeletor was probably the first character that I liked for that. Even as a kid, even as a young kid who, you know, tried to root for the good guys in almost all. Well, I take that back. I mean, in G.I. Joe, I totally rooted for Cobra because I loved Cobra Commander for the same reasons. But you know, there were times where I would watch He-Man and Masters of the Universe, and even though He-Man was like my role model, and I'm going to elaborate on that in a minute. There were times where I'm like, God, I wish Skeletor would win just once. Just once, I would love for Skeletor to win. He was my Wile E. Coyote in that sense, and you know, in Cobra Commander too. But you know, he's just such a great villain, and a goofball, whether he's being funny or menacing or insulting people. The key to a great Skeletor insult, by the way, it's alliteration. That's the key. You bumbling buffoon. You flurry. What was that one time he said to Beastman? You furry, flea-bitten fool! I'll cover my throne with your hide. I don't watch this show too much. No, not at all. But really, Skeletor is just outstanding, and you know, even today, like, he makes me laugh as an adult watching these shows, and that's probably the greatest contribution of Masters of the Universe, is giving us Skeletor. There was a line in the Netflix documentary where somebody said, it may have been The Toys That Made Us, it may have been that one, but they said that Skeletor was more famous than the brand itself, and I'm like, that's probably true, because Skeletor is just, and even today I see Skeletor pop up in like internet memes all the time because he's just so great. I love you, Skeletor. You also gave me this annoying voice to imitate. He's just a wonderful character, and I love him to death. But to elaborate on He-Man, the centerpiece of the whole thing, and the central character of Masters of the Universe, He-Man was a role model to me, and I had several role models as a kid. You know, Optimus Prime, I think a lot of us looked up to. Being a wrestling fan, Hulk Hogan was the big hero wrestler that every 80s child was issued in the mail with samples of Tide. But He-Man, I think what I admired about He-Man, not only, you know, there was the whole dynamic with Prince Adam where he was like Clark Kent and Superman, except Clark Kent had no powers. So that created dramatic elements where he could lose the sword and couldn't become He-Man, or, you know, he would have to go out of his way to disappoint his parents on purpose just to keep his secret and various other things. So while I could identify with that, although I did have to wonder, it's like, why can't he tell his parents that he's He-Man? Why can't he tell Teela? There's one episode in the show where Teela flat out says, my ideal man is someone with He-Man's courage and Adam's wit. And I'm like, Adam, just right there, dude, right there. But anyway, he can't tell him because all of his enemies will make targets of his friends and family. Like, he's the prince. Skeletor's targeting him and his family anyway. But anyway, I digress. Why does Orko get to know? Whatever. I'm going off on tangents. But anyway, so I could identify with Adam and like those life lessons and that type of stuff. But when he was He-Man and he was the ultimate hero, I always admired that he wasn't just a straight up, I punch everything and that solves my problems type of hero. Superman wasn't that way, despite his reputation. You know, Superman's best moments are where he uses his brain or his compassion. And He-Man had kind of the same thing going. I recall this one episode, which did not make this list, but it has one of my all-time favorite He-Man moments where he's going through this jungle to find a cure to save somebody who's dying. And time is of the essence. So He-Man is going through this jungle and passing all these tests and getting through all these traps and dangers and everything. And he comes up against this entity that is more powerful than him. He can't fight it and blocks his entryway and demands that He-Man humble himself and beg to let him go or anything like that. And without hesitation, He-Man, the most powerful man in the universe, Mr. Muscle, stronger than anything, can punch his way out of any situation seemingly, without hesitating gets down on his hands and knees and begs this entity to let him pass so he can go help his friend. And that kind of humility and humbleness always stuck with me and was very powerful to me as a kid and was an important lesson. It's like, you know, you don't have to brawn isn't always going to win the day, and being compassionate and thinking with your heart sometimes is the best way to go, and not thinking of yourself. So that's just one example of why He-Man was such a great hero to me as a youngster, and the great lessons that I learned from watching that show. To this day, I still think it's a perfect show for young audiences. Whenever I hear people say that show was too violent, I laugh. Because that was a controversy at the time. It was too violent for kids, and I'm like, are you watching the same show? That's one of those things. My parents would laugh at it. They would watch it and just be like, what? It's too violent. What are you talking about? I remember my favorite example of this is when Power Rangers became famous, and there was some controversy surrounding that about how violent it was. My mom watched an episode of it with us, and she was literally laughing the entire time. And she was like, guys, it's fine, you can watch this. And so no, that's too violent. Okay, sure, whatever. So that's one of my favorite memories from my childhood. But anyway, I just wanted to come on here, and before I start listing my favorite episodes from the show, which was very hard to do, by the way, narrowing it down to 20, I just want to come on here and pay my respects to a franchise that brought me a lot of joy. I fully understand that the show is cheesy. I fully understand that the show has limited animation and was made for children, but this list was generated from the point of view of somebody who watched it as a kid, and I'm remembering the episodes that stuck with me, and the ones that, when I think back on the show, those were the ones that gave me the best memories, and those were the ones I enjoyed the most, and in some cases were the ones I had on video and watched the most. And because I had certain episodes that I would be like, I don't really feel like watching that one, but the better episode's the second episode on the tape, so I'll just fast forward and watch that one. I had my favorites, for sure, and I just wanted to come on here and just pay my respects to a wonderful franchise with great imagination and a bonkers, bombastic, no rules style that is still appealing to this day. And I hope that the show, the franchise, comes back in some capacity. We have a new She-Ra show on Netflix, which I haven't watched, but I would love for Masters of the Universe to come back in some capacity and be done well, and be done. It's come back a few times. Like I said, there was the New Adventures. There was a show in 2002, which was good, and I recommend it. I don't know if I think the show kind of got in its own way a little bit, but that's a discussion for another time. Now, the question is, am I going to do another video like this for other cartoons I watched as a child, like Thundercats, Transformers, G.I. Joe, DuckTales, Ninja Turtles, things like that. Looney Tunes. I thought about doing one for Looney Tunes. Not to this level. I won't do one. Not to this level, because this video was literally 2 years in the making and just drove me nuts to get finished. You won't be seeing another one quite like this one. So no She-Ra, no 2002 show, no New Adventures, nothing like that. Actually, when I originally thought about doing this video, my original idea was to do a top 50 incorporating the original Filmation show, She-Ra, the original Filmation show, the New Adventures, and the 2002 series, and do a top 50 episodes. And then I realized that was completely insane and just too much of an undertaking, so I just shortened it to 20 episodes of the original show that I fell in love with in the first place. So yeah, you're not going to get another video quite like this one ever again, so this is a special treat. Consider it a Christmas present and a look into my deranged, nerdy psyche and the weird, bizarre shit that I am into. So let's jump right into it. Let's go into my top 20 favorite episodes of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. He-Man. We start off the countdown with this fun little gem, Castle of Heroes. In this story, Monteague, an old friend of Skeletor's who looks like Mr. Toad gone bad, and actually now that I think about it, it's pretty hard to believe that Skeletor had any friends to begin with, but I'll press on. Monteague comes to Eternia seeking to recruit He-Man, the most powerful man in the universe, to be a part of his intergalactic army made up of ancient figures such as Hannibal and this very interesting take on Blackbeard the Pirate. That design is hilarious, but I think what makes this episode really stand out, more so than the story itself, and the story itself is fairly straightforward. We would see other instances of He-Man being coerced into doing something by some evil force that's trying to convince him to do something, or join up with them, or something to that degree. But I think what sets this one apart and gives it a little bit of its own identity is actually Skeletor, which is pretty interesting because the way the story is set up, Skeletor could have been left out of the story entirely. You could have just featured Monteague trying to recruit He-Man, and I think you would have had a pretty solid episode, but Skeletor adds a lot of flavor to it because he wants He-Man to be taken away, and he wants Monteague to succeed in recruiting him. So when Monteague subjects He-Man to all these tests to prove his worth to be a part of this army, we see Skeletor actually root for He-Man, because if He-Man wins and He-Man gets recruited, then he's off Eternia, and Castle Grayskull and everything else is just free for the taking at Skeletor's hands. So to put Skeletor in a situation where he's actually rooting for He-Man was actually pretty fun and made this episode somewhat memorable. So overall, fun episode, pretty cool setup, and Skeletor, as always, was entertaining.
Oh my goodness, that was impressive. Impressive, you boob. It was spectacular.
This next episode, Reign of the Monster, is one of my favorites for one very specific reason. If you've followed my channel for any length of time, you know that I love monsters, whether it be Godzilla, the Ray Harryhausen movies, the classic Universal monster movies. I just love monsters, and He-Man and the Masters of the Universe was a show that gave me plenty of monsters, but the star monster of this episode really takes the cake. The story itself is fairly straightforward. Skeletor wants to obtain the Staff of Avion to unleash Mulcrum, an ancient monster god, to help him conquer Castle Grayskull. And good lord, the design on Mulcrum is just amazing. I mean, look at that thing! It looks like every nightmare I ever had sex with every friggin' heavy metal album I ever owned. It just looks incredible. It's just really unique design, even for a show like this, which was all about creating all these different creatures in this magical world where anything could happen. This thing looked weird and creepy and awesome, even on this show. So, just for the fact that it gave me such a memorable creature, I have to give this episode some love. So, really, it's all about Mulcrum. He's awesome, very unique monster, and overall, I think his presence made for a very fun episode.
Say hello to Mulcrum!
In the episode Hunt for He-Man, we see our hero in a very rare, vulnerable position. After swallowing some poisonous water following a mishap with the Wind Raider, He-Man is left sick and weakened and open to attack from Skeletor and his goons. So, in this story, it's not He-Man who is the hero, he is the victim, and it's Cringer, that's right, Cringer, not Battle Cat, who has to act as the protector to keep He-Man out of Skeletor's clutches. And along the way, he meets up with some villagers that contemplate whether or not they should actually help He-Man or sell him to Skeletor for money. Damn, that's pretty harsh, but it makes for the nice moral center of the entire episode. I think I like this one more than a lot of the other episodes because it does kind of break from the status quo, and putting He-Man in the weakened state for most of the story actually makes it a lot more dramatic than the norm, and watching this as a kid, I was just on the edge of my seat hoping that He-Man would snap out of his sickness, or wondering what would happen if Skeletor actually caught up with them. It's a nice, dramatic episode that breaks from the norm, and overall a lot of fun.
I'll use the magic of the Havoc Staff to show us who is here.
I didn't know you could do that.
I could write a book about what you don't know.
In this episode, a villain known as the Game Master wants to recruit He-Man to compete in his intergalactic gladiatorial games. To sway He-Man, he takes Teela as his prisoner and challenges He-Man to come and face him to get her back. The problem? He also took Adam's sword, and he doesn't know Adam and He-Man are one and the same. Without the powers of He-Man, Adam now has to go save Teela on his own and compete in the Games Masters competition to do it. The idea of having a tyrannical figure forcing the good guys to compete for his own amusement is a classic trope, and one that Masters of the Universe would use quite often, but where this episode shines is through the character work between Adam and Teela, as their relationship is explored more so than in most episodes. Typically, Teela is seen dressing down Adam for shirking his duties or being a fool, and she's justified in doing this since she doesn't know he's He-Man off saving the world. And that is still there to some degree in this episode, but we see a little bit more warmth and caring between the two, and that adds a little bit more depth and adds more stakes to the story. I also typically like episodes that play with the dynamic of Adam not having any powers before transforming into He-Man, and we also get to see Orko and Cringer get their little comedy routine in, which is fun. And overall, I think all of those elements combine to make for a really good episode and one of the gems from Season 1. By the way, this minion of the Game Master, does he look familiar to anybody? Any Thundercats fans out there? Does he look just a smidge like a certain gray Thundercat? Kinda, sorta, maybe? Oh well, maybe it's just me.
Game's over. You lose.
Talk about a character-driven episode. Into the Abyss is probably the least action-oriented story in the entire series. Outside of an early scuffle with Beastman, there is no villain, and the episode largely just centers around our heroes on a normal day. But in that time, we get to see how they interact with each other and what their relationships are like when they aren't off saving the world. The relationship between Teela and Adam, Adam and Cringer, Teela and Duncan, the Sorceress and Teela, and even Adam and He-Man are all explored here. The biggest conflict in the story is Teela's fall into the abyss near Castle Grayskull, but even then, the focus is on the characters, how they feel about her, and the rescue itself is fairly routine compared to what you would see in other episodes. But I always like these kind of stories. It kind of takes a break from the action and reminds us that these characters are like a family and they love each other and get frustrated with one another. That adds a bit more realism to a world with talking green tigers in it, and makes it stand out among the usual typical action-oriented episode. It is also pretty amazing that for a very low-key, character-driven episode, it also gives us probably the most awesome variation of Adam's transformation into He-Man.
We must climb down, and I know someone better suited for the task.
That's strange. I wonder what...
By the power of Grayskull!
The morals were always a key component of the series. I already talked about the lessons learned segments that were tacked on at the end of every episode, but like I said, in my youth, I preferred being able to draw whatever the lesson of the story was from the story itself and figure it out on my own. Double-Edged Sword offers one of the show's most powerful lessons as a young boy named Chad, who is eager to one day join the Royal Guard and get in on the action, learns about the consequences of fighting. What I liked about this was that the lesson wasn't portrayed in a way that either condones excessive violence or condemns it. Now true, it would be hypocritical for a show like this to say there is never a good reason to fight, but I like that the lesson was portrayed in a way that showed kids that whether fighting is right or wrong, there are drastic consequences. The lesson gives this episode its purpose and its significance, and fortunately a lot of the material surrounding it works well too. Merman and Trapjaw tried to steal Eternium from our heroes, and that element will not only power the Royal Palace for thousands of years, but also gives Trapjaw the strength he needs to rival He-Man. This is probably Trapjaw's best episode, not only for all the gadgets he uses, but also for his memorable toe-to-toe fight with He-Man in the episode's climax. In the end, though, it is the moral of the story that makes it shine. But one question I do have, though. Burby. What is that thing?
Later, I pulled myself out of the rubble. My legs were paralyzed. I would never walk again. But I was one of the lucky ones. Many didn't come out at all.
Next up is an episode where Skeletor actually gets the best of He-Man. Yeah, it happened. Skeletor tricks, traps, and soundly defeats the most powerful man in the universe. Now, instead of killing him like any other villain not bound by the restrictions of children's television would do, Skeletor wipes He-Man of his memory and banishes him to a faraway planet. With the help of Zodak, one of his rare appearances in the Filmation series, Orko, Cringer, and Ram Man go off to the distant planet to save He-Man. Meanwhile, the amnesiac He-Man finds himself caught in the middle of a war on this faraway land, which looks like it is inhabited by characters from Narnia if they were designed by Dr. Seuss. The planet's resources are being plundered by, Plundor, who's a giant pink rabbit. I'll just let that speak for itself. Weirdness aside, the premise of this episode is one of the show's best, and once again, it is fun to see the unlikely heroes have to save the most powerful man in the universe. It is also good to see that even after losing his memory, He-Man is still compelled to be the hero and still compelled to do good. And that's how we all like him. And heck, even the weirdness of Plundor and everything else makes it stand out among most typical episodes.
Well, stranger, what is your answer going to be? I could use those muscles of yours.
I may not remember where I came from or even what my name is, but I know what you're doing to this world is wrong.
Calling all Star Trek fans, tell me if this doesn't sound familiar to you. An omnipotent alien force decides to pit the greatest representations of good and evil, in this case being He-Man and Skeletor, against each other in a battle to the death. Yeah, that sounds exactly like that old episode of Star Trek where Kirk battles the Gorn. Heck, it even has the same title. However, I consider it more of an homage than a straight-up rip-off. Unlike Kirk and the Gorn, this battle is a lot more personally charged, given the history that He-Man and Skeletor have already had with each other up to this point. The end result is one of the most memorable confrontations in their long-standing rivalry, and one of the most memorable episodes in the series as a result. If you were a fan of both characters and invested in their conflict as a kid like I was, then this episode was can't miss.
These will be the champions.
It is hard to believe that a show called He-Man and the Masters of the Universe could boast so many strong female characters, but it did. In this episode, following a confrontation with an evil sorcerer, Teela and Evelyns find themselves having to rely on each other to survive a desperate situation in the desert. Along the way, both characters learn to not only work together and trust each other on some level, but they also learn about each other and why they do what they do. It is probably the most interesting look into Evelyns' character and her motivations throughout the series, and these two characters actually do make for a great pairing. I've said before in the past that I do like stories where heroes and villains, or even just people on opposing sides, have to come together to solve a common goal. Those typically make for really great stories, and it would be very easy for an episode centered around two female characters in a show intended for boys to be nothing more than shameless pandering for politically correct brownie points. But I never felt that way about this episode or most of the other stories from the show centered around their female characters. They just had two great characters from their large cast to play with, and they told a nice story with them, and turns out that these two characters actually have really good chemistry. It's one of the most memorable episodes of the show, and if you're a fan of Teela and Evelyns, this episode is absolutely can't miss.
Why do you waste your time fighting for Skeletor?
I have no loyalty to Skeletor. It's his power I want. Someday, I'll seize it from him, and then all Eternia will feel my might.
You know I'll have to stop you.
I know you'll try. Too bad, really. We make a nice team, you and I.
In a strange way, we do.
Next up is Origin of the Sorceress. The key word in that title being origin, since origin stories were extremely rare in this show. In the modern era, we are used to constant origin stories, prequels, and all sorts of other things to fill in the backstory. This show opted to kind of leave everything up to our imaginations. I mean, we never even got origin stories for He-Man and Skeletor, the two main characters. Here, we do get the backstory of one of the series' most important figures, the guardian of Castle Grayskull herself, the Sorceress. In this episode, she tells He-Man about how she became the Sorceress and the conflicts surrounding that history-altering event. Now, typically, in most episodes, the Sorceress would be relegated to providing exposition, pointing the heroes in the right direction, or simply sitting in Castle Grayskull waiting for the conflict to come to her. Here, though, we get to see her given the spotlight, and it turns out to be a satisfying tale about how she came to be one of the most powerful and influential figures on all of Eternia. And also in this story, we get some foreshadowing for certain important events that are yet to come. She-Ra! This is another example of the show shining when it focuses on its characters, creating a classic episode in the process.
Before you go, Sorceress, I want to thank you for all that you've done. Not just today, but for all of those years you patiently waited, protecting Castle Grayskull.
It has been the highest honor, He-Man. And it has been, and always will be, a joy for me to call you my friend.
She's a very special person, He-Man.
Yes, Duncan, she is. She's very special indeed. He-Man!
Evelyns' plot is one of several episodes I had on VHS back in the day, and it is one I watched a lot. For me, it exemplified many of the things I loved about the series in my youth. Colorful characters, great imagination, a lesson to be learned, and a great showcase for the villains. In this episode, after Skeletor's many failures to get Korodite from this show's answer to the Munchkins and the Seven Dwarves, the Widgets, Evelyn decides to use brain over brawn. With her magic and deceptive nature, she manages to trick the Widgets into straight up giving it to her. Now, the Korodite is an interesting MacGuffin since Skeletor plans to merge it with his armor, and when worn, it will give him the physical strength he needs to be on par with He-Man. It is kind of weird that an episode with Evelyn's name in the title would actually be one of Skeletor's greatest, but once he gets the Korodite, it results in probably the show's greatest confrontation between Skeletor and He-Man. The Widgets themselves manage to not be irritating, and the very basic lesson of don't trust strangers too soon is handled fairly well through Evelyn's manipulations of Squinch. They even get to play the heroes at the end, which was pretty neat. But this episode is another example of just how much fun the villains were. Between Skeletor's temper tantrums, Evelyn's scheming, and the big fight at the end, this episode is proof that while we might like the heroes, the villains are just too much fun.
Now I have the power! Come face me, He-Man! Power against power!
Oh god! An Orko-centric episode made the top 10? Yeah, I know it sounds really strange, but it's where we are right now. Orko, by his very nature, is a character that is very polarizing. You either love him or you hate him. I'll admit I loved him when I was a kid, but that certainly faded when I grew into being an adult. However, I maintain that when written properly, Orko can add a lot to the show, case in point being Dawn of Dragoon, his finest hour. In this episode, we get to see Orko go back to his homeworld of Trala, as he is called back to stop Dragoon, a servant of Skeletor that is capturing all the Tralan natives. It turns out that Trala is a topsy-turvy place where not only is Orko's magic exceptionally powerful, but trees grow upside down, fish fly, and all sorts of other weirdness. Also, Adam finds he cannot transform into He-Man unless he says, "By the power of Grayskull" backwards, one of the show's most memorable moments.
If I say, by the power of Grayskull backwards,
Maybe then it will work.
Grayskull, power thee by!
Most memorable of all is actually the character of Driel, Orko's girlfriend. Turns out the two are pretty cute together, and the moment when they show faces is probably the single greatest scene to feature Orko. And no, they never actually show what Orko looks like, which was a disappointment to me and every other child back then, but I think the scene plays much better that you don't see them. It is great to see glimpses of the life that Orko could have had he stayed on Trala, and it also goes to show that you shouldn't judge a book by its cover.
And by the way, you're one fine magician, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Not even me.
Season 1, the most underutilized character in Eternia's royal family was easily Queen Marlena. Despite having the interesting backstory that she came from Earth, they never really used her beyond just being the queen who sits on her throne. Fortunately, in Season 2, it was decided that she should get a spotlight episode, and it yielded one of the show's very best entries. Skeletor, ever the scheming villain, captures the entire royal family, and it's up to Queen Marlena to use her piloting skills that she developed on Earth to save her husband, son, and all their friends. I like how the story is structured in a way that Marlena is the knowledgeable veteran that is capable to pass down her knowledge to younger warriors like Teela. Total sidebar here, I have to throw this out there as well. Skeletor is completely a hoot in this episode, so if you want some good Skeletor material, check this one out. He's great. But the real star of the episode is Queen Marlena. The episode's premise was satisfying in that it finally paid off the idea that she's from Earth, and that she led an entire life before ever coming to Eternia. And it also expanded on her character in a satisfying way. This is best exemplified in the episode's final scene, which is a perfect capstone to the episode and one of the most well-written moments in the entire show.
Mother, I was just wondering.
Yes, what is it, Adam?
Well, I was wondering, when Skeletor had us all chained up, why did you free me instead of one of the others?
Because you are my son, Adam. I didn't have time to free everyone. And I had a feeling you would know what to do.
Mother,
Adam, a mother always knows her own son. And what he is capable of doing. I've always been very proud of you, Adam.
Prince Adam No More explores one of the other key relationships of the series, Prince Adam and his father, King Randor. To conceal his identity as He-Man, Adam often pretends to be a bit of a doofus, which tends to disappoint his father. No longer wanting his father to be ashamed of him, Adam tries to prove his courage and his worth by not transforming into He-Man at the first sign of trouble. Meanwhile, poor old Beastman is banished by Skeletor simply because Skeletor was in a bad mood that day. This leads him to try and win favor back with old Bonehead by capturing King Randor and taking him to Snake Mountain. Focusing on Adam and Beastman provides a nice dual protagonist story with both the hero and the villain suffering through very similar situations. Their reactions and sorrow over their situations feel believable and make them feel more three-dimensional as characters. And the interactions between Randor and He-Man towards the end provide the episode with the proper emotional weight, including a nifty sequence of father and son teaming up for the big fight. The old Uncle Ben quote certainly applies here, as Adam has to learn that he can't use He-Man to make himself happy, and he's got greater responsibilities than himself. It's a tough lesson that all superheroes come to terms with, and it was cool that it got tackled in He-Man's world as well.
I love that boy, you know. I'm hard on him sometimes, but I hope he knows how much I care. It's hard for a father to say, I love you, to his son.
Sometimes it's hard for Adam to say that, too.
In Teelas Triumph, Skeletor, without even realizing it, transports the Sorceress off Eternia with his new invention, and eventually uses this device on He-Man as well. The Spirit of Grayskull, and no, I have no idea who or what that even is, selects Teela to be the Sorceress's replacement. She has no idea why she's been selected for this task, but takes on the job and becomes the new protector of Castle Grayskull. He-Man and the Sorceress have to find their way back to Eternia, while Teela has to deal with Skeletor and his evil warriors as they invade Castle Grayskull. The episode succeeds in exploring key elements of Teela's past and exploits the secrets that the audience already knows, but she's unaware of. It gives us a glimpse into the future that she is destined for, and also gives the character a tough situation to overcome. She isn't used to being the Sorceress or being a magic wielder, but has to learn these new skills and, in addition to using her own abilities, take down Skeletor. It makes for a satisfying challenge for her to overcome. It is a great episode for Teela and explores her relationship with the Sorceress, which results in one of the most emotional moments of the series in the final scene.
I just don't think I'm special enough to do what you do. I don't even know why I was picked to substitute for you. Teela, there are certain things that I cannot tell you now, but someday you will understand everything, I promise. As for not being special, oh, Teela, you're very special. You found the courage to overcome your fears and help defeat Skeletor. You will never, never know how special you are to all of us. I know that your mother is very proud of you. Thank you. You know, I never knew my mother, but I wish she could be just like you.
Yes, I'm cheating. We have a tie at number 5. But the reason I'm counting Evil Seed and To Save Skeletor together is because they are both classic episodes for the exact same reason. They feature stories where He-Man and Skeletor have to team up. I mentioned in my review of The Witch and the Warrior that I like stories where enemies have to work together, and having two of the all-time great cartoon rivals join forces for brief moments are just golden. In Evil Seed, Eternia is being overrun by evil plants led by, Evil Seed, who looks like a cabbage cosplaying as the Grim Reaper. He-Man and Skeletor can't stop the plants themselves and are forced to join forces to stop him. Skeletor is clearly the star of this episode, as his resistance to having to work with He-Man in the first place is priceless. It's all about putting him in this situation where he has to swallow his pride and work together with He-Man and the Sorceress, and it creates one of the series' most enduring classics. To Save Skeletor builds off that idea. It opens up with a somewhat chilling scene as an injured Whiplash forces his way into the palace and begs for help. It turns out Skeletor bit off a little bit more than he can chew, and he summoned a powerful demon known as Shigora, a being that looks like Jabba the Hutt if it was designed by H.P. Lovecraft. And now He-Man and his friends have to go save him. This one goes to the trouble of building up an entire team made up of both the heroes and the villains, leading to a thrilling climax inside Castle Grayskull where all the heroes and villains combine their powers. And like I said, Skeletor is the real star in both episodes, as he clearly doesn't want to work with He-Man and almost resents himself for doing it. And of course we get the inevitable betrayal from old Bonehead in both episodes. As a fan of the character, it was nice to see him put in situations where he could bounce off of He-Man directly and even kinda sorta get a win, even if it made him miserable to do it.
Unite with Castle Grayskull? Never! Never will I set foot in Castle Grayskull until the day I enter as its conqueror. Begone, He-Man! He-Man, are you there? He-Man, I am calling as a friend. I am ready to come to Grayskull. He-Man!
We have another 2-for-1 in number 4. House of Chicod is the series' only 2-part adventure. This is pretty amazing, as action-adventure shows like this one lent itself to 2-parters and multi-part miniseries. G.I. Joe, Transformers, Thundercats, and DuckTales all did this. But He-Man stayed largely with solo standalone episodes. House of Chicod, being the only 2-parter, helps it stand as one of the series' most unique stories. Typical aspects of most standard He-Man episodes like Skeletor and Castle Grayskull are kept out of the action, and even mainstays like Teela and Man-at-Arms are not around. This gives it a fresher feel and a break from the status quo. The gang of heroes we follow through the 2-parter is odder than the norm, as He-Man goes along with Ram Man, as well as 2 new characters, the archaeologist Malaktha and his apprentice Stanlin. These episodes chronicle the search for the House of Chicod, a mysterious temple that was raised from the sand, and seems to be a point of interest for the villain of Part 1, Lord Mask. Have you ever wondered what it would be like if Darth Vader got He-Manized? That's pretty much what Mask looks like, but he's a great villain, acting as a living shadow and shrouded in mystery, raising a bunch of questions about him that we never really get answers to. Part 1 has a lot of filler material before getting to the episode's climax, as we get battles with Trapjaw, a giant turtle that looks like Gamera, and a few other things. But it's Lord Mask that keeps it interesting, as he even does damage to Orko at the end, removing the character from Part 2 entirely. Part 1 comes to a close just as the team is preparing to enter the temple, and we get hit with this.
To be continued.
At age 4, that was enough to give me nightmares. However, this is balanced out by easily the most hilarious moral ever included in the series. Take a look at this.
In today's story, I sure was busy. Boy, did that hurt. Ramming things may look like fun, but it really isn't. Trying to use your head the way I do is not only dangerous, it's dumb. I mean, you could get hurt badly. So listen to Rammy, play safely, and when you use your head, use it the way it was meant to be used, to think. Until later, so long.
That is just priceless. But other than that, this two-parter was more about the scares than anything else. That's what this two-parter offers. I feel like it was designed to scare kids, and I love that type of stuff. Part 2 takes it even further as we enter the House of Chicod and get to meet the wicked sorceress herself. The monsters and magic spells within give off a creepy vibe and make this the scariest episode in the entire series, at least from the point of view of kids. Part 2 involves Stanlin not wanting to be left out of exploring the temple, going near it on his own only to be sucked inside by Chicod's magic. He-Man, Ram-Man, and Battle-Cat then have to go save him. The creepier elements are balanced out with some humor from Ram-Man, who really gets to shine in this two-parter, both from an action standpoint and from a humor standpoint. But really, it's all about the scares here, and I love this type of material. Every year for Halloween, we get wrapped up in watching movies and TV specials to put us in the mood for the holiday. I have to admit that the Great Pumpkin Peanut special never really grabbed me in the way its Christmas special did. However, I made sure to watch this two-parter every Halloween. That's right. This is my Great Pumpkin, and it was given to me by He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. Good job, guys.
Help! Help! Help!
The problem with Power is one of the most emotional episodes in the entire series, as we see He-Man have to confront himself making the worst mistake imaginable. In what is probably Skeletor's most diabolical plan to strike against He-Man, he plots to trick our hero into thinking he accidentally killed someone. That's right, He-Man is tricked into believing a person died through his own actions. Unable to cope with this, Adam surrenders the powers of He-Man, which results in probably the series' most powerful scene. I have to admit as well that the voice acting in this one is quite good, lending everything the proper weight as He-Man/Adam carries the burden and guilt of his own actions. Admittedly, this episode would have been better if He-Man actually did accidentally kill someone rather than being tricked into thinking he did. I think if this episode had been made a decade later, they would have been allowed to write the story that way. As is, though, this is one of the most powerful, pun intended, and hard-hitting episodes with some of the series' finest moments. It is actually pretty heartbreaking to see He-Man reduced to this, but that only makes it all the more satisfying when he gets back into the game. Being a hero the caliber of He-Man is never easy, and it was great to see this episode tackle that whole idea.
Today I broke a promise and proved myself unworthy of the great power that was given me. And if I am unworthy, I can no longer permit myself to be He-Man. Let the power return!
Teelas' quest is one of the show's earliest episodes and does a lot to contribute to the series' mythos. Not only is this the episode where we learn Queen Marlena came from Earth, but we also learn about Teelas' parentage. Turns out that Man-at-Arms is not her biological father, but he has cared for and raised her throughout her entire life. Teela has always known this and doesn't love Duncan any less, but she begins to ask questions about who her true mother is. Duncan claims it is a secret and doesn't offer any answers. This plays into the whole secret-keeping throughout the show. If this show were coming out today, they would definitely have all these secrets explode in the good guys' faces. But it is also interesting that the idea of who Teela's mother is isn't kept a huge secret for very long. The show opts to give the audience the answer within the first few episodes. To get the answer she wants, Teela goes off to the Crystal Sea to consult with the Oracle. Merman takes this opportunity to ambush her and offer her as a sacrifice to the creature Bakal. And He-Man is off to stop him. Total sidebar, but this is probably Merman's best episode as well. In the end, Teela and He-Man get help from the most appropriate source. The This episode showed that there was more to the characters than just action hero archetypes, and there was real emotion underneath. It also showed the close family vibe that the main characters would have with each other throughout the series. And of course, if you haven't figured it out at this point, Teela's mother is...
The Sorceress of Grayskull. Mother? Yes. You are my own daughter, and someday you will take my place as the mystic guardian of Grayskull. But for now, you have other deeds to do. And until that time when your special destiny calls, you must forget what you have learned today. She will only remember that her mother was a woman who loved her very much.
Yeah, my favorite episode in the series is the one with a big dragon in it, but trust me, there is more to it than that. The Dragon's Gift offers probably the most purely fantasy-based episode in the series, and probably my favorite showcase for what makes He-Man such a great hero. In this story, Skeletor casts an evil spell that turns Man-at-Arms into a crystal statue. He-Man and a very desperate Teela go to Castle Grayskull to help him, but the Sorceress offers no answers except to consult with Granomir, the oldest and wisest of dragons. To find Granomir's lair in Darksmoke, He-Man and Teela have to hit the books. Yeah, there was no Google back then, kids. They had to read actual books. Isn't that great? They deal with the snowy terrain and ice trolls to eventually reach Granomir's lair, and the Great Dragon's introduction is just amazing.
Granomir!
Okay, I could do without the helmet, but it doesn't make Granomir any less awesome, especially with all the barbs he throws at He-Man and Teela.
He-Man? I have heard your name whispered on the winds of legend.
In that case...
Silence. I did not say I respected the name, only that I had heard it. Dragons pay little attention to the lies of legend. And who is this little girl who presumes to speak without my permission? We shall see how your tongue wags when my magic sends you to the realm of demons. Granomir does not fight humans. Granomir wins.
Granomir is easily my favorite guest character in the show's history, capturing the age of someone who has lived for thousands of years and has the massive ego to go along with it. It turns out that Granomir has issues with humanity and has no intentions of helping, despite the fact that he can do so easily. It is made very clear that He-Man cannot force Granomir to help him and can't use force against him, so he offers to give Granomir a gift in exchange for helping Man-at-Arms. I won't give away the ending, but what ultimately happens perfectly captures He-Man's heroism. He isn't just a punch this or punch that kind of hero, as this episode shows. He uses his brain and his heart to save the day as well. The Dragon's Gift is a classic that offers us one of the show's greatest creations and perfectly shows what makes He-Man such a great hero. So thank you to everyone that worked on this episode because you gave me a childhood favorite.
You can thank me best by letting me sleep and never bothering me again.
I want to talk to you today about safety. Accidents don't just happen to other people, they can happen to you. But you can do some things to help prevent accidents from happening. Using a safety belt when riding in a car can save your life or prevent you from being seriously hurt. Now, I know you've been told never to play with matches, because if you do, you're playing with fire. And fire can burn your toys, your home, your family, you. So use your common sense and think about what you're doing. It's better to be safe than sorry.